G'day all, welcome back to the G-Man Show. Today we're going to look at an ABC News in-depth episode called Is the Great Australian Dream Broken Beyond Repair? Let's jump straight in. It's a very interesting watch.
Australia's housing crisis is the result of decades of failure by the nation's political classes. After rising at about double the rate of incomes for 25 years, houses have become unaffordable for nearly all but the well-off. As a result, a home is no longer the achievable sanctuary that Australia's longest-serving Prime Minister, Robert Menzies, described.
One of the best instincts in us is that which induces us to have one little piece of earth with a house and a garden, which is ours.
The fear of losing the Australian dream, of owning that little piece of earth, has haunted governments for generations.
I think the reality is, like he said at the start of this video, unless you're well off, so unless you are a dual income household, earning a higher than average salary, and you are good with your money, and have managed your money to be able to save a deposit, then you may have a chance at being able to buy a modest freestanding home in any of the major capital cities. And that for me is really mind-bending. I can even think back to when I was growing up, and everybody I knew when I was a kid all lived in freestanding homes in the backyard. And I just think that's where all it's gone. Unless, once again, you are the wealthy. So any of the working class or lower middle class people who contribute a lot to society just aren't able to have that security that I think it was Alan Kohler, I think his name is, the guy who's narrating this video, has described. So what do we have now? We really just have a future, in my honest opinion, and once again, guys, you can tell me I'm a tinfoil hatter. We have a future where the majority of people are going to live or be able to purchase apartments. There'll be mass construction of apartments that'll all get approved at some point. So we have, say for instance, we have South Yarra in Melbourne. It's a highly densely populated precinct with high-rise apartment buildings, and many of them. In my honest opinion is this will be rolled out, and the approvals and all that sort of stuff will be put through so these can be developed in all suburbs. So this is what people will aspire to live in, and we'll be living in a new cramped sort of huge city environment, especially the way that the population is growing. Now, this might not happen in the next 10 years, but I firmly believe it will happen over the decades. And then these apartments that historically have been rather achievable, even for a single person to buy, those prices are getting a little bit out of hand now too, especially in those huge buildings. And I even think about the costs of ownership, such as strata, etc. Once again, you've got to be a well-off person on a single income to be able to purchase one and comfortably live in it. Most people will end up being renting, especially once the current generations, so millennials, Gen X, boomers. Like millennials, I think, are really the last ones who are going to have a fair crack at getting in at it's not even a reasonable price point, because that's the thing. The average house first purchase of a home is now approaching 40, which is millennials. So I'd hate to think how further that gets pushed out when you're talking Gen Z, and then I think it's Gen Alpha, the current ones that are coming through, like the school system. It's just, to me, it's going to be, you're going to be 50 years old by the time you buy, able to save up and buy your first house. There'll be 40-year mortgages, there'll be lifelong mortgages. Anyway, that's my rant. Let's keep going.
In 1948, Prime Minister Ben Chifley tried to give the federal government control over prices and rents in the Constitution. Australians didn't go for it. Political parties kept promising to keep housing affordable.
We pledged ourselves to bring home ownership once again within the reach of ordinary Australian families, to end that sense of despair and frustration.
10,500 the bid is.
51. 51,000.
Is there a further increase?
Despite promises, prices kept rising.
At $502,000 once.
It's my view.
I mean, politicians can promise all they want, but it's my firm belief as well that the property market's its own almost living organism, entity, so to speak, that feeds off the FOMO and the human desire to have a stable place to live, and people will pay more and more for it. They'll take on more and more debt. They'll sacrifice quality of life. They'll sacrifice the disposable income due to the cash flow hits just to be able to have that house. Like, people will do whatever they can to get a home, and that's why we've ended up where we are. Where, in my opinion, the governments have failed is by not using taxpayer money, all those billions and trillions of dollars that have been wasted on projects that have gone belly up and blowouts of computer systems in government departments, all this stuff you hear about in the hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, to support the ongoing annual build and maintenance of higher standard commission housing, government housing, social housing, whatever you want to call it. Because now that has all been shifted, that responsibility for the most part, onto the private landlord, which creates its own problems for everybody.
John Howard did more than anyone to make housing unaffordable, through reforms like cutting capital gains tax in half.
I haven't found anybody in 7.5 years shake their fist at me and say, Howard, I'm angry with you for letting the value of my house increase.
Most Australians are homeowners, so it stands to reason that politicians want to preserve and increase the value of houses to keep most voters happy. But today's leaders must now deal with a housing affordability crisis created by their predecessors. They say they have a plan, but what is it?
The plan is to keep promising things to people that will never happen, and it'll keep getting worse.
Well, it's to increase supply, which is what I'll be examining. While there are also strong arguments for cutting demand through tax reform and less immigration, so far government policy is largely focused on the supply side of the housing equation. In 2023, National Cabinet agreed to build 1.2 million more homes over the next 5 years. The federal government isn't building them itself, of course, but, getting them built. It's handed that job over to the states and territories, with Victoria and New South Wales leading the building blitz. In Sydney, it's mostly apartments planned along train lines in dozens of existing suburbs, from the north out to the west.
This is happening very much. I'm a Melbourne boy. This is very much happening in Melbourne, even if you look in the south, on south side. All the train stations along, let's just talk about the Frankston line. They have apartments built up around stations in a lot of areas. And it will continue to become more congested. They're talking about the supply side. I think, supply side focus is very good. But unfortunately, they have an offsetting factor here, which is the level of immigration. Like, that's just the elephant in the room at the moment, and at risk of being called a racist and a bigot. You got to just call it out that the hundreds of thousands of people coming in every single year and being spread across the main metropolitan cities, being Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane. What do you think is going to happen there? For those, they're not making hundreds of thousands of homes and dwellings every year to offset that, and then also give the existing residents, citizens, the opportunity to have an ample supply of housing to compete, I guess, for in the market and purchase at a somewhat reasonable price.
The New South Wales government has told local councils that the idea is to fill the gap between traditional detached homes and high-rise apartments.
G'day, Alan.
It's the type of housing that researchers like Brendan Coates from the Grattan Institute call the missing middle. When governments are talking about increasing the density, what sort of homes are they talking about?
So mostly we're talking about units and townhouses of 2 to 3 stories up to sort of medium density apartments of 6, maybe 8 stories. What we see is that that's the sort of housing that people most want to see, is those kind of medium, missing middle density forms.
What is the missing middle?
The missing middle is anything really between, a suburban quarter acre or 1/8 acre block and the sort of high density apartments that you see sort of around the CBDs of, say, Melbourne and Sydney, for example. It can be anything from a 2 to 3 story walk-up townhouse through to a 6-story apartment building. So it's a term that does cover a broad swathe of housing options. There is very little development between that sort of 5 kilometre and 15 to 20 kilometre area from the city.
As day breaks, buyer's agent Bianca Field is already helping Sydney residents find housing within that sweet spot.
In the morning, I always do my morning walk. Typically, I check my phone and I update clients.
The 28-year-old helped find and secure property for those looking for their next home, and many of her clients are first home buyers.
So I just want to go through this list with you quickly. Yep.
Bianca says apartments serving young professionals without kids are plentiful, while the supply of houses for expanding families within budgets under 1.5 million is dire.
They're typically
1.5 million. That is astronomical for apartments or units or even townhouses that can house children and families and young families. That's a scary number.
typically looking for at least 2 bedrooms, but really hoping for 3. Most of the clients that I have coming through, they want to be within 15 minutes from the CBD, and typically that's on a train line. What are you thinking? What we're finding is 3-bedroom apartments and townhouses are swamped with buyers who I think in a way are thinking that they've found a solution, but unfortunately everybody else has found that solution too.
And that's the thing too, they were talking about that uncomfortable middle between houses and high-rise apartments. Reflect on my youth and even 20 years ago, and people are like, oh, they're putting up these tiny little dog boxes. And when they say that, they were talking about, 4 townhouses on a block type thing. Those townhouses on a block, they're going to be seen as a large residence very soon.
We are selling the property. There will be a new owner here today. 1420, 30, 40, 50, 1450 now, 70.
It's Saturday morning and Bianca is checking out what's on the market in the inner west.
15 now, sir. 20. Can you turn your fingers around the other way for me? Not that way, that way. 20. First, second, third time. Let's see what interest rates do to help you along the way. Bidding done. Sold here.
Here we go, and I truly believe, especially once they start this cutting cycle, it's going to go hard. Again, the prices are going to spike, and I know I've copped a bit of shit in my comments for saying things like I believe that the Melbourne house market's going to boom. It's going to have a run. If we get 2 and 3 more interest rate cuts by the end of the year, even 2, people are going to be rushing down to their mortgage broker with FOMO. And we already have a high clearance rate. I think it was over 70% this most recent weekend, which means it's a strong market. And over 80% is like boom times. So we had this period of high rates, which really didn't do much. Everyone would have thought that the rates would have really put a lot of cold water on the housing market. A lot of people might have been foreclosed and not afforded their mortgages anymore, their mortgage repayments, especially investors. That's what everyone was sort of hoping, especially those looking to get into the market and understand that hope. Someone else's loss can be somebody else's gain. It's human nature. But people held on, and the market has been very much irrational. You would think that higher interest rates and a soft outlook on economy, high inflation, discretionary income being less, and therefore also less buying power due to higher rates, prices really would have come off, but they've continued to either remain stable or go up, which really says there's a lot of cash out there. There's a lot of money that people can access. They can liquidate maybe investments they have, maybe stock portfolios, to be able to move money and purchase, requiring less debt funding. And that leaves a large portion of the population unable to compete. Because I've had people say to me, they send me a job listing, a house listing off realestate.com. They say, I've got a good mate of mine who's actually looking to buy at the moment, and he rants and carries on about it, which is fair enough. The prices, even the ranges, are very high, let alone what they sell for on auction day. He goes, who has the money for this? Who can afford 1.8 million bucks or whatever it is, like in the millions? The thing is, there are people who can afford it and they're buying them. And I think that probably leads on to their anger in society about wealth inequality, and therefore that gap getting wider. It's interesting to look at it from both sides, because I can really empathise with both sides.
These first home buyers secured a 2-bedroom house on just 190 square metres.
Wow, look at that.
All for a cool $1.65 million.
Had massive cracks in it. Probably structural problems with cracks that wide. You're going to probably need re-stumping and all sorts of stuff. It's going to cost a bit of money.
The next stop, a busy 3-bedroom townhouse in Leichhardt, 7 kilometres from the CBD. It's an auction price guide of $1.3 million.
What was your name, sir? So I'll just make a note.
I think in Sydney, if we want to live anywhere close to public transport, close to the city, I think apartment's probably going to have to be the way to go.
It's a bit rough that a budget slightly over $1 million doesn't get you a patch of grass.
Turns out that townhouse sold for just over $1.4 million.
Hey, how you going?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Bianca is updating one of her clients, Callum Sauer, who's still hoping he might be able to get that patch of grass.
There's obviously just still a fair bit of uncertainty.
There's honestly a real lack of the kind of property that we've been looking at for you.
Yeah.
That we will get a couple of things that pop up over the next couple of weeks. I'll just keep making those phone calls.
Callum Sauer and his partner Jacinda have 2 kids and are quickly outgrowing their 76 square metre apartment in Sydney's inner west.
Our youngest daughter, Bailey, she's obviously going to be crawling and walking around soon. So I think it also puts a bit of a ticking time clock on how long we can actually stay here.
The young professionals live in a different state to their parents, so proximity to friends, schools and work is crucial.
I'd love to be able to say we can afford a 3-bedroom house, but I think just the way things have been going, that's completely off the table. What we'd likely have to do is get like a 2-bedroom place that needs a little bit of work, potentially turn it into a 3rd bedroom down the line. We just have to...
I don't know. I think, in my opinion, doing renovations and all of that after the fact, it's going to cost you more then than what it's going to cost you now. But I can understand if you don't have the money to be able to get in and stretch.
To be open to all of that, just given our budget.
With the median house price in Sydney $1.6 million, it's tough for upsizers like Callum to stay optimistic.
Yeah, I didn't think it would be this difficult.
We're $1.6 million. So if you got a 20% loan on 1.6 million, that's 320,000. Right, you need just for the base deposit to qualify for lending. Plus, you need to be able to earn a certain amount of money to qualify to borrow the rest, to be able to service it. Then you got your transaction costs. So on a transaction of 1.6 million, 5.5%, you're probably looking at about $80,000 just to give to the government in stamp duty, just for the pleasure of owning the house. Plus all the other hidden transaction costs, which run up to the thousands. So really, you're looking at over $400,000 just to get your foot in the door. I mean, how many people have $400,000 sitting around in their late 20s or early 30s who are thinking to start families. And that's why people are pushing it back or not doing it at all, because they can't see a future. If they themselves cannot buy a home, how are their children going to have a good life? When the economy and the property market is just as cooked as what it is.
I've been in Sydney for 10 years, but I didn't think it would be like this. And it is really concerning for my kids, because we probably would not be in a position to help them out when they're my age.
While some continue to chase the Australian dream, in Victoria, those who've already achieved it are often against more density. Here along the beaches of Melbourne's southeast, just 15 kilometres from the CBD, residents of Bayside Council are facing dramatic change. Last year it was among dozens of councils slated for more development as part of the Victorian Government's housing goal for 2051.
They announced a housing target, which is an increase of around 31,000 new dwellings. Doing the math, it's probably around 70% uplift in the dwelling numbers.
All right, good morning.
In October, the Premier chose Bayside as the location to announce further details of the state's plans. It sparked outrage.
Homes in the suburbs, homes near public transport.
Shame, Premier, shame! They're going to build 20-storey apartment towers in your streets.
I mean, they can boo all they want, but I think it's coming. I think that the pressure on the population is going to get that much where they have to do this, because it's the only affordable option that people are going to be able to buy to be able to house all these hundreds of thousands of people coming in every year.
20-storey apartment towers? Did anyone ever ask you? No! Shame, shame, shame! Shame, Premier, shame!
That is rage bait, that one, isn't it? They get a whole bunch of boomers on there to see, being NIMBYs and trying to block out, redevelopment or overdevelopment of their area at the expense of the younger generations. You got to love how they do it.
Until now, Bayside residents have enjoyed some of the strictest planning restrictions in Metro Melbourne, with a height limit of 2 storeys across more than 80% of the local area. The state's plan could see parts of Bayside rezoned for 8 storeys.
I personally believe that we need to provide some extra density in certain areas in our municipality. But the number itself is rather, considering that we've been delivering around 500 dwellings a year. Now we are expected to deliver 1,500 dwellings a year. I believe that's probably a stretch on our infrastructure to be able to cater for the extra number of dwellings.
The Victorian Government told 7:30 it's working to get more homes off the ground faster in areas that have been locked up for far too long. Mayor Hannah Al-Mualim says his council has already been increasing density near train stations, but his constituents don't want to see it bleed into wider residential areas.
It has been happening to an extent, just not that high-rise type stuff. Like that stuff that he's walking past here, these sort of townhouses that are these basically double-storey apartments, they're everywhere. They're everywhere in the Bayside areas. They're everywhere all the way up to Frankston, really, especially along the Nepean Highway. Big blocks of them.
But the development...
But it's still not enough. And I don't want to see everything built up like that, but you just can't think it's going to go any other way.
Created here at 5 levels on one side, which is the apartment component, and 3 levels that is the townhouse component, and that transitioned nicely to the existing residential stock. What we're concerned about is spreading this much density well into the neighbourhood area. We attract people to our municipality because of its existing character, and we really need to work with the community to protect that character.
Economist Peter Tulip says those who oppose government plans for more density are a big problem, albeit common. To what extent do you think what's happened now is that the housing affordability crisis has basically exposed a fundamental conflict now between what you might call the NIMBYs, people who don't want denser housing, and those who need and want cheaper housing?
I think you've described the crux of the housing issue, that to make housing more affordable, we need to increase supply. We need more infill, a lot more townhouses, a lot more apartments, and a lot more high-rises. And that is being opposed by local residents who don't like change.
And how significant a roadblock are zoning restrictions when it comes to building more homes, as we currently need?
Research we did at the Reserve Bank says that zoning raises the cost of housing by about 40%. In Sydney, a little bit less than that in Melbourne, and a bit lower still in the other big cities. Builders would happily go up higher if they...
That's the thing. So that's why there's a lot of intergenerational angst at the moment, especially with wealthy boomers and older Gen X. It's because they've been able to get into these really good or very well sought after areas at a somewhat affordable. I mean, it's all relative to the time when they bought it too, but very affordable compared to now price. And now that they're comfortable. They don't want to see the area change in any way to accommodate the future generations, and are very much pushing back on it, just like that video we showed earlier about all the people screaming shame, shame, shame to the Premier and all of that. I think it is unavoidable. I think it will happen. But I do think it is pretty raw to pull the ladder up on people. I mean, no one's going to want to live in a... No one's ideal decision or choice where they want to live is in a big, tall apartment building in the middle of a suburb somewhere. But I just can't see it being any other way. And then it'll be 2 and 3 bedroom apartments. And then as the generations fly by, it'll turn into studio apartments, will be somewhat affordable. And then it'll be like a little cryogenic freezer box. That's all you can buy. You live in a cage like you see in some of those large Asian cities where people are literally living in metal cages with a few all stacked up on top of each other. It's and it sounds all doom and gloom, but I can't see it going any other way unless there's some real change here. And in my honest opinion, it should be reprioritising these huge budgets that are used for other things that don't provide a lot of value or immediate value to taxpayers and putting it towards social housing.
They had the permission to do so.
Isn't it true that when you densify suburbs and you build more apartments, the residents of those suburbs bear the cost of more traffic, more people going to the hospital, more people in the schools? Everything becomes more crowded and the lifestyle, quality of life declines.
So if you went back 50 years and you said, well, look, these inner city areas, which are denser than the rest of the city now, they're going to be terrible places to live because you're going to have overcrowded hospitals, overcrowded schools, more traffic. Fast forward to today, they are the areas that are denser. They're not as dense as they need to be, but they are still the most attractive places that people want to live.
Isn't there a point where it becomes too uncomfortable?
The alternative is to say, sorry, no one else can live here, this is our domain. And you see the suburbs essentially become sort of open-air mausoleums. They become places, where you've got a gerontocracy of older people living in the area and no one else. They can't even find people to work in the local cafe because they've got to train it in from 6 suburbs away.
6 suburbs away, if you're lucky, an hour each way or more. Many people are doing that already. It's, say, people coming in from Melbourne, from the peninsula. But I know people in Mornington and Frankston and areas around there that have got jobs in the Melbourne CBD and they commute all the way in and back 5 days a week. Doing what you have to do. Doing what you have to do to get in. 6 suburbs, that'll be a dream on the train. That'll be half an hour, 20-minute train ride. Beautiful.
There is an alternative to densifying suburbs close to the city, and that's expanding further out. Tarneet is about an hour's train ride west of Melbourne CBD.
Remain behind the yellow line until the train stops.
The size of this local council area has more than quadrupled since the mid-1990s, and it's now home to more than 300,000 people.
When boarding, there's less space for passengers to get off the train first and then make their way down the aisles of the service.
Hey, you can say I'm racist here, but look, that's probably where all the migration's going, into those affordable areas, and therefore making those areas unattainable or not enough choice for other people to move into. There's only so far you can go. Yeah, the problem here is who we're bringing in. And I can understand immigrants wanting to come here for a better life and all of the opportunity we have here. This is nothing against immigrants at all. It absolutely isn't. It's about government milking immigrants as a source of revenue, both by importing taxes and by the visa application process, which could be thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. Every little step of the way, they get a little clip. They're getting paid for it. So why would they not do it? Then they want to point fingers at each other or start intergenerational warfare between boomers and Gen Z, saying that's the problem. Anyway, guys, I think I'm going to leave it there. We did get a lot of the way through it. I'm going to put the original video in the description. Please go and check that out. Thank you very much for watching. If you've made it all the way to the end, let me know if you've enjoyed this one.